a developing nation, a country once labeled too slow, too crowded, too complicated to ever lead the global conversation. And yet today she stands where no one expected her to be, not just keeping up, but outsmarting, not just participating, but leading. India didn't do this to win a race. She did this because she refused to be defined by anyone else's finish line. This wasn't a move made in arrogance. It was a move born in quiet rooms, from minds that never made the headlines, from engineers who worked without sleep, from scientists who made the impossible affordable, from farmers who used wisdom older than time to adapt to a modern crisis, from women who turned homes into hubs of invention, from youth who didn't run away from their nation, but ran toward it, with ideas no one saw coming. The world often sees winning as a competition of egos, a race to outshine, to overpower, to dominate. But India's journey wasn't built on ego. It was never about proving someone else wrong. It was about proving to herself that she could rise not in someone else's shadow, but in her own light. Outsmarting the world's most powerful nation wasn't about rivalry. It was about remembering who she was all along, and choosing to rise not with noise but with clarity, not with arrogance but with anchored purpose. There is something profoundly quiet about the kind of victory that comes from vision, not the kind of vision that shouts grand plans and forecasts, but the kind that begins in stillness in the soul of a country that was once overlooked, once silenced, once told it would never catch up. And yet, while the world was measuring her with outdated maps, India was drawing her own. Slowly, boldly. Silently, she didn't seek applause. She didn't chase headlines. She just kept showing up, one innovation at a time, one idea at a time, one decision at a time. That's the kind of brilliance that doesn't always catch the eye until it changes everything. That's the kind of intelligence the world calls a shock when it finally breaks through the surface. But for India, it wasn't a shock. It was simply a promise kept to herself. Outsmarting doesn't always look like loud declarations or dramatic victories. Sometimes it's found in the discipline to keep going when everyone tells you to give up. Sometimes it's in the refusal to let failure define you. Sometimes it's in the quiet commitment to building something no one else can see yet. That's what India did. She built in silence, she persisted through noise, she trusted her own timing, and while others ran faster, India learned to walk wiser. While others played louder, she played longer. Her success wasn't rushed, it was rooted, and when you're rooted in purpose, you don't need to rush. You don't need to compete. You simply grow, organically, authentically, unshakably. That's why the world is surprised now. Because it was looking for performance, but India was focused on process. The world measured power in speed, in spectacle, in spending. But India measured it in depth, in resilience, in the ability to rise again and again, no matter the obstacle. And when you move from vision rather than vanity, the results are not just impressive. They are undeniable. She never tried to imitate. She innovated. She didn't react to what others were doing. She responded to what her people needed. While others were competing to be seen, she was working to be effective. And now, the outcome is not just a moment of glory. It's a model for what's possible when you stop asking, "How do I beat them?" and start asking, "How do I become all of me?" India's story teaches us something powerful, that true victory is not about who you surpass. It's about who you become in the process. And when you lead from vision, not vanity, you don't just win once. You create a ripple that lasts far beyond any comparison. So yes, the world is in shock, but India isn't, because this wasn't an accident. It was alignment. It wasn't a game won. It was a life lived with intention. And when your victory comes from that place, it's no longer just a win. It becomes a legacy. In a world obsessed with noise, Silence is often misunderstood. People assume that if you're not loud, you're not strong, that if you're not on every screen, you're not succeeding. But India's journey was never about volume, it was about value. While others made bold statements, she made bold moves quietly, steadily, without seeking validation. Her genius was not in how loudly she shouted her progress, but in how deeply she believed in it when no one else did. It's easy to be impressed by flash, impressive to some when success is worn like a badge. But real strength doesn't need to perform, it simply exists. India didn't need to scream her worth. She simply lived it, one purposeful action at a time. While the world was busy watching headlines, she was investing in her roots, in her people, in her ideas, in her future. That kind of discipline doesn't look like genius until it becomes results. And then the world has no choice but to notice. She was mocked, questioned, underestimated. Not once or twice, but for decades. The stories told about her were rarely stories of hope. Yet even in those moments, she didn't lose sight of her own story, because true progress never comes from proving others wrong. It comes from proving yourself right. And so she built brick by brick, idea by idea, slowly but with conviction. There's a special kind of power in quiet progress, because when you're not distracted by applause, you're focused on what matters. India knew that her greatest threat wasn't someone else's success, it was the temptation to forget her own pace, her own rhythm. So she stayed in alignment with what made her unique. She didn't copy someone else's playbook. She wrote her own, using ink made of resilience and paper woven with cultural pride. She taught the world something profound, that progress isn't always loud, but it is always deliberate. That you don't need 1,000 cameras on you to do something extraordinary. You just need to believe that your quiet efforts are worth it. Because they are, and when that belief becomes habit, habit becomes culture, and culture becomes transformation. That's what the world is seeing now, a transformation that didn't happen overnight, but over generations. This wasn't a fluke or a moment of luck. This was what happens when you choose substance over show, when you believe in long-term impact more than short-term applause. The genius wasn't just in her inventions or her technology. It was in her patience, in her decision to keep building even when no one clapped, in her refusal to give up even when no one believed. So yes, the world is shocked that someone they once dismissed is now defining the future. But maybe the real shock is that they didn't see it coming, not because it wasn't visible, but because they weren't paying attention to what truly matters. Because progress, when done right, doesn't need to announce itself. It simply arrives undeniable and unshakable. India didn't try to be loud. She tried to be real, and in doing so, she showed us all that quiet genius, rooted in purpose, always wins in the end. There's something deeply moving about watching someone rise when no one expected them to. It reminds us of the silent strength we all carry, often hidden beneath layers of doubt and history. India's rise is not just a moment of economic or technological advancement. It is a deeply human story. A story of endurance, of identity, of reclaiming a voice that was once silenced by colonization, misunderstood by the West, and doubted by the very powers now watching in awe. The journey of reclaiming dignity is never loud. It starts in silence, in long, forgotten places where dreams had to whisper to survive. And that's exactly where India began, by choosing to honor her roots instead of running from them, by deciding that who she was, with all her culture, complexity, and contradictions, was not a weakness but a strength. The world told her she needed to change to succeed, but instead, she redefined what success looked like. It wasn't easy. There were countless moments when giving up would have been easier than standing tall. The weight of expectations, the sting of criticism, the burden of comparison, those were the invisible battles fought every day. But still, she chose to rise, not with perfection, but with persistence, not with arrogance, but with authenticity. India's genius lies in the fact that she didn't let the noise of the world drown out her inner voice. She chose to listen to that quiet knowing that said, "You are enough." And from that place of self-belief, she created industries, innovations, identities. She wasn't waiting for the world to invite her in. She was building a world of her own. That's not just smart strategy. That's soulful leadership. And when people ask, how did India do it? The answer is not in numbers or charts. The answer is in her heart. It's in the courage to believe when no one else does. It's in the grace to rise without resentment. It's in the fire that never went out, even when the world tried to put it out. That kind of strength doesn't come from books, it comes from experience, from generations that carried the weight, so this generation could carry the dream. She didn't outsmart anyone by playing their game. She changed the game entirely. She brought her own rules, her own rhythm, her own reasons. And that's what real transformation looks like. Not imitation, innovation, not resistance, reinvention. Now the same voices that once doubted her are the ones asking questions. They're trying to analyze, to measure, to decode. But what they're missing is that this wasn't a formula, it was a feeling. A belief deeply planted in the soil of struggle and watered with years of silent effort. That kind of growth doesn't make sense on paper. It makes sense in the soul, so yes, the world is shocked, but India is not, because this moment wasn't an accident. It was a seed planted long ago, finally in bloom, and when something grows from love, from loss, from resilience, it doesn't just rise, it shines. There comes a moment in every journey when the world finally turns to look. Not because you shouted for attention, but because your light became too bright to ignore. India's moment didn't arrive overnight. It was born out of countless days of being overlooked, of being told she wasn't ready, of being made to feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. But rather than letting those moments break her, India let them build her. Every doubt became fuel. Every failure became a lesson, and every silence became space for reflection. There's something undeniably powerful about a nation that stops seeking validation and starts embracing its own value. That's what India did. She stopped asking for a seat at the table and started building her own, one that reflected not just ambition, but authenticity. One that wasn't shaped by imitation, but carved out by inner truth. And in doing so, she became an example, not of perfection, but of possibility. In the noise of global competition, India chose clarity. While the world was fixated on speed, she chose sustainability. While others chased short-term wins, she stayed loyal to long-term vision. She didn't need to dominate to demonstrate power. She needed to be consistent. And consistency is never glamorous. It's the quiet commitment that happens behind closed doors when the world isn't watching. It's the discipline to show up every day with purpose, even when applause is nowhere to be found. The truth is, no one expected India to lead. But maybe that's exactly why she did, because when no one is looking, there is freedom, freedom to fail without shame, freedom to learn without pressure, freedom to rise without having to justify every step. And in that space, India dared to be different. She embraced her complexity, her colors, her contradictions. She didn't cover her scars. She let them speak. And they told a story the world couldn't forget. The shock today isn't just about technological advancement or economic success. It's about spirit. It's about the strength it takes to keep moving forward when the world keeps telling you to stay behind. India didn't rise because someone else fell. She rose because she chose to stand tall, because she looked in the mirror, saw every flaw, every wound, and still whispered, "I am capable." She didn't compete with others. She competed with her past, and every time she stumbled, she reached deeper. Deeper into her culture, her courage, her compassion. That depth is what makes this rise so meaningful. It wasn't just strategy. It was soul. It wasn't just vision. It was vulnerability turned into victory. Now, as the world takes notice, it's not just economic analysts and tech giants who are watching. It's dreamers. It's those who have been told they're too late, too small, too much, because India's story isn't just hers. It belongs to everyone who's ever been underestimated. It's proof that you don't have to be born into power to rise in power. You just have to believe in the quiet strength that lives inside you. So yes, the world may be shocked. But India is not surprised, because she always knew that when your progress is rooted in purpose, the results will speak for themselves. There's a rare kind of courage in choosing not to copy the giants of the world, but to become something entirely your own. That's exactly what India did. While many believed that to succeed, one must walk the same path the powerful walked, India quietly carved out her own. Not out of rebellion, but out of trust. Trust in her roots, trust in her people, trust in the idea that originality is not a risk, it is a responsibility. The easy thing would have been to follow, to mimic the policies, the systems, the ways of thinking that had worked for others. But India chose the harder road. She turned inward before reaching outward. She listened to her own heartbeat before echoing another's voice. That self-awareness, so often dismissed as slow, so often mistaken for weakness, became the very strength that startled the world. She did not sprint. She walked with intention, each step carefully placed, not to catch up to someone else's success, but to stay true to her own rhythm. In a world obsessed with fast growth, fast results, and fast rewards, India became the story of patience, of how deep roots grow slowly but stand through any storm. And when the winds of global opinion shifted, she didn't fall. She stood taller. What shocks the world isn't just the success. It's the calm confidence behind it. India didn't declare victory with fanfare. She simply worked, day by day, mistake by mistake, innovation by innovation, and in doing so, she showed something the world often forgets, that power doesn't always need noise. Sometimes the quietest strength is the one that lasts the longest. There is something profoundly beautiful about watching a nation embrace its uniqueness and use it as fuel. While others streamlined, India diversified. While others centralized, India democratized. She didn't see her differences as obstacles. She saw them as opportunity. Her diversity wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a mosaic to be celebrated. And from that mosaic came creativity, resilience, and the kind of adaptability no system can teach. When people say India has outsmarted the giants, they often look for strategy. They search for numbers, policies, deals. But what they don't see is the spirit, the quiet resilience of 1 billion people who kept showing up even when the odds said they shouldn't, who kept building even when the world wasn't watching, who kept believing even when the results were slow. This isn't just about innovation. It's about identity. It's about reclaiming the narrative that for too long was written by others. India didn't just succeed. She redefined what success looks like. She made room for emotion in economics, for humanity in technology, for wisdom in progress. And by doing that, she reminded the world that intelligence isn't just about intellect, it's about intention. Now, the world is watching, not with pity, not with advice, but with awe. And India, in her grace, isn't gloating. She's grounding, rooted in humility, anchored in history, propelled by purpose, because this was never about proving others wrong. It was about proving to herself that she was always right to believe in her path, in her people, in her possibility. There is something deeply transformative about silence when a nation doesn't respond to criticism with noise, but with progress. India never needed to shout her worth across oceans. She just kept moving forward, even when the world wasn't applauding. And in that quiet forward motion, she discovered her real strength. It wasn't about making headlines. It was about making history. The world didn't see it coming. That's the beauty of steady evolution. It's subtle, it doesn't demand permission. It simply unfolds. While others were looking elsewhere, India was growing not just in numbers or industry, but in mindset. She was learning from her past without being shackled by it. She was building for the future without forgetting where she came from. Her transformation wasn't loud because it was deep. And anything that grows deep grows differently. It's not easily shaken. It doesn't need to explain itself. When people ask, how did India outsmart the most powerful? The answer is simple. She didn't try to be anyone else. She didn't try to outrun anyone. She tried to outgrow herself. That's where the real shift happened. In classrooms where curiosity was sparked, in villages where dreams refused to stay small, in cities where ambition learned to walk hand in hand with compassion. That's where the future was being written. India's brilliance wasn't in copying the success models of others. It was in breaking her own limits. She learned to listen to her own people, to trust their instincts, to empower their voices. And that trust began to multiply slowly, but surely. It reached women who had been told they couldn't. It reached children who had never seen someone like them in power. It reached artists, thinkers, coders, farmers. The people who shape a country from the inside out. The shock to the world isn't just in the numbers, the infrastructure, or the diplomacy. It's in the spirit, the kind of spirit that says, we don't have to dominate, we just have to deliver. And India delivered, not perfection, but progress. Not power through pressure, but power through purpose. This wasn't about a race, it was about realization. A realization that transformation starts when you stop measuring your worth against someone else's standard. India outsmarted the world not because she had more, but because she used what she had with more wisdom. She turned constraints into creativity. She turned delays into determination. She turned silence into strength. That kind of transformation isn't accidental, it's intentional. It requires humility to begin, discipline to continue, and grace to carry it all the way through. And now the world is looking in India's direction not with skepticism, but with surprise, because something changed. Not just in policies or strategies, but in posture. India stands taller today not in arrogance, but in quiet assurance. The kind that doesn't need validation to know it's valuable. This isn't just India's moment. It's a reminder to the world that when you honor your roots, when you embrace your flaws, when you stop waiting for permission to be great, you become unstoppable. And the world can't help but notice. Would you like a conclusion to wrap up the full speech in this same heartfelt and empowering tone? So here we are, standing at the edge of a moment the world never predicted, a moment where headlines are no longer dominated by questions of if. India will rise, but by wonder at how gracefully she already has. And what makes it truly powerful is that India never chased validation. She never begged for a spotlight. She simply walked her own path with the quiet confidence of a nation that has nothing to prove, but everything to give. This speech was never about comparison. It was never about putting one nation above another. It was about recognizing a journey that was once dismissed, now being respected. It was about celebrating a transformation that didn't come through shortcuts, but through sheer perseverance, dignity, and belief. India's story is not just for Indians. It's for anyone who has ever been underestimated, for anyone who has been told their way is too different, too slow, too unpolished. It's a reminder that the world doesn't always reward noise. It notices authenticity. And when you stay true to who you are, when you embrace your challenges instead of hiding them, when you commit to the long road instead of the easy one, you don't just grow. You rise. This is not the end of India's journey. It is the beginning of a new narrative, written by the hands of people who once had no voice. A story where progress walks hand in hand with purpose, and power comes not from dominance, but from determination. Let the world be shocked. Let it ask questions. Let it wonder how, because the truth is, India didn't need to outsmart anyone. She just needed to trust her own strength. And finally, she did. And now the world is watching, not with pity, not with doubt, but with respect. And India smiles not to boast, but because she always knew this day would come.